There are stories the war tried to erase, records buried beneath layers of mud, silence, and classified ink, reports sealed by men who swore to protect victory, not truth. But some files resurface, like bones unearthed by the sea. One of them, marked Bunker 32, Normandy, 1944, was never meant to be read again. Eyewitnesses disappeared. Official archives list it as a collapsed structure. Yet whispers among surviving soldiers speak of a place where human sight was stolen, not by bullets or shrapnel, but by something far darker. They said that when the Allies broke through the steel hatch, they didn't find an enemy. They found a question that no one could answer. What happened beneath that cliff was erased from every war journal, every military record, every memorial stone. But tonight, that silence breaks. For the first time, the story of Bunker 32 will be told, not as rumor, but as the last remaining truth retrieved from the sand. Before we begin, remember, this channel exists to uncover the untold, the forbidden, the erased. If you believe these forgotten stories deserve to be heard, subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video so that history's silence is never rebuilt again. The wind along the Normandy coast carried more than the scent of the sea. It carried the residue of burnt iron and old blood, the echo of 1,000 unburied cries buried under waves that never stopped washing the shore clean. December 1944. The Allies had already broken through the Atlantic Wall months earlier, pushing deeper into occupied France. Yet some regions remained restless, pockets of silence that even victory refused to claim. Beneath the dunes near Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, the earth still trembled softly at night, as if breathing. Locals called it le sol qui parle, the ground that whispers. They avoided it. Even birds didn't land there. Captain Harold Mendez had heard those rumors from the villagers when his reconnaissance platoon was ordered to sweep the western cliffs. He didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions. He believed in orders, maps, and lines on paper that defined where men were supposed to live or die. Yet as his boots sank into the cold sand that morning, something inside him felt off. The air was too still, too heavy, the kind of silence that presses against your chest like a weight. His men followed, rifles ready, eyes scanning the grey horizon. The sea behind them groaned under a pale sky, while in front, a jagged hill of concrete jutted out from the dune like the spine of a buried beast. At first, they thought it was just another coastal defense structure, one of the hundreds of bunkers the Germans had scattered across the shoreline. But as they approached, they realized this one wasn't on any of their operational charts. Its steel door was half buried, welded shut, and painted over with a thick layer of tar that smelled faintly of iodine. Someone had tried very hard to hide it, or to keep something inside. Mendez ran his hand along the cold surface and felt faint scratches carved into the metal, numbers, perhaps coordinates, though most had been eaten away by corrosion. Only one symbol remained legible, the number 32, stenciled in faded black beneath the Nazi eagle, its wings cracked like broken glass. "Looks sealed for years," Sergeant Duval murmured, adjusting his helmet. "Not long enough," replied Mendez. They set up their torches and cutting tools. The first strike of the blowtorch broke the stillness like a scream. The smell of burning oil filled the air as the steel began to glow orange. Beneath the hiss of the flame, they could hear something, a low resonant hum that seemed to come from within the bunker itself. Not mechanical, not human, just vibration. Mendez frowned, turning off the torch. The hum stopped. He waited. The sea groaned again in the distance, but nothing else moved. He exhaled, nodded, and motioned for them to continue. When the door finally gave way, it exhaled, a long, slow breath of stale, warm air that rolled over them like a body exhumed from the earth. The stench was unbearable, damp rot, rust, something organic, long decayed but not gone. Private Collins gagged and stepped back, muttering a prayer under his breath. Their flashlights pierced through the darkness, illuminating a narrow staircase spiraling downward. The walls were slick with moisture, the concrete streaked with dark residue that looked too much like dried blood. "Smells like a hospital," one soldier whispered. "No," said another, "like a slaughterhouse." They descended slowly, boots echoing off the narrow corridor. With every step, the temperature dropped. Mendez could hear the faint crackle of his own breath in his mask, the pulse in his ears. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. Not just humid, but thick, almost syrupy. It clung to the skin, to the lungs, making every inhale a conscious effort. And then, about 20 feet down, they found the first sign of life, or what had once been life. A journal, half buried in dust near the wall, its pages fused together by time and moisture. On the cover, written in Gothic script, was a single word, Beobachtung, observation. Inside, though most of the ink had bled, a few fragments remained readable. Test subjects exhibit resistance to light exposure. The hum persists beneath the lower chamber. Subject number 17 still responds to sound. No signatures, no dates, just words suspended between science and madness. By the time they reached the bottom, their torches began to flicker. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber. The ceiling arched low, dripping condensation onto the floor. In the center stood an empty medical gurney, rusted, its straps stiff with age. Around it, glass jars floated in cracked formalin, the outlines of preserved tissue barely visible through the cloudy liquid. Collins raised his light toward one jar and gasped. Inside was a human eyeball, or what remained of it, pale, shriveled, veins suspended like roots. Then another jar, and another. Dozens of them, lining the shelves like trophies. Duval crossed himself. What the hell were they doing here? Mendez said nothing. His torchlight caught something on the far wall. A large, faded emblem, the insignia of the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi research division that dealt not only in archaeology and anthropology, but in occult experimentation. Beneath it, painted in red, a phrase that had partially washed away. Die Augen dürfen nicht sehen. The eyes must not see. The silence thickened. Even the dripping stopped. Somewhere deep within the bunker, a door creaked. Slow, deliberate, metallic. The men froze. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the floor, resonating in their bones. Collins's flashlight shattered as if the filament had burst from pressure. Darkness swallowed them whole for a single breathless second, and in that second, Mendez swore he heard something moving in the dark. Not footsteps. Crawling. Soft. Wet. "Back up," he barked, voice echoing down the corridor. The beam from Duval's light sliced through the dark, illuminating only concrete and dust. Then faintly a shape. Something slumped in the far corner, motionless. They approached. It was a soldier. German uniform, skin pale and brittle, but his eyes, they weren't there, not gouged out, gone, sealed over by smooth, unbroken flesh. Collins screamed. Mendez silenced him with a glare. "We document this. Then we leave." He didn't yet know that this was only the first of 31. The captain took one last look at the lifeless figure. Its mouth was slightly open, lips dry as though trying to speak, and from deep within the sealed throat came a faint vibration, like the echo of a whisper that could not escape. The hum intensified. Above them, the door they had entered through slammed shut. The sound of the ocean vanished, and for the first time since the invasion of Normandy, the silence beneath the cliffs began to breathe. The narrow corridor leading deeper into Bunker 32 seemed to twist upon itself, a concrete serpent burrowing further into the cliff. The men advanced slowly, their flashlights trembling with each uneven breath. Every step produced echoes that didn't quite return right, sounds that came back slightly delayed, distorted, as if the walls were alive and learning their rhythm. The air was heavy, laced with the sour odor of disinfectant and metal, and underneath it, the faint sweetness of decay. Somewhere behind them, drops of condensation fell from the ceiling, counting seconds like the slow ticking of a clock that didn't want to stop. Captain Mendez led the way, his pistol drawn, beam sweeping across the walls. Strange markings lined the corridor. Equations, anatomical sketches of eyes and words scrawled in German. "Wir sehen durch die Dunkelheit." We see through the darkness. The handwriting was frantic, descending into scratches and claw marks by the final lines. Someone had written until their fingers bled. When the passage opened into a larger space, the smell intensified. It was colder here, unnaturally so, Frost had formed along the bolts of a heavy iron door ahead. A single red cross was painted across its surface, the kind used in medical facilities. But beneath it, the paint had been smeared into streaks by hand, leaving behind what looked almost like fingerprints, dragged downward in desperation. Duval turned to Mendez. This wasn't a bunker, it was a lab. Mendez said nothing. His silence was its own admission. They unlatched the door. It resisted at first, swollen by rust, then gave way with a metallic groan that seemed to echo for miles underground. The beam of the flashlight caught something pale inside, a room lined with beds. 31 of them, each bed perfectly aligned as though awaiting inspection. Upon every mattress lay a body covered by a grey military blanket, folded precisely at the shoulders. The men hesitated. Collins took a cautious step forward, lowering his light to the first bed. When he lifted the blanket, the beam flickered over a face both peaceful and horrifying. The soldier beneath was young, maybe 20, maybe less. His skin was waxy and tight. His mouth was stitched shut, black thread still biting into the lips, and where his eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth flesh, seamless, untouched, as though he had been born blind. "Oh God," Collins whispered, stumbling back. They sealed them." Mendez knelt beside the body, his breath shallow. He'd seen death in every form, gunfire, explosions, starvation, but never this kind of precision. There was no violence here. It was surgery, intentional. He touched the skin around the eyes. It was cold, but pliable, as if preserved. No signs of rot, no odor of decomposition. Whoever, or whatever, had done this, had done it to last. Then Duval called out from the far end, "Sir, you'll want to see this." At the center of the room stood a table, once sterile, now stained with age and rust. Upon it rested an open folder of medical notes, each page meticulously typed in German and stamped with the insignia of the Ahnenerbe. Next to it, a series of glass slides glimmered under the flashlight beam, each containing what appeared to be slices of human retina. The documents referred to something called Versuch 17 to 31, meaning experiment 17 through 31. Mendez flipped through them carefully, translating under his breath. Objective: induce inverted visual spectrum, reverse optic perception through deprivation of external light stimuli. Expected result: adaptation to darkness through internalization of vision. He paused at the next line, the ink smudged by a thumbprint. Note: subjects exposed to prolonged darkness begin to hear patterns in silence. The words made no sense until the hum returned. It came from the walls, from the floor, from inside their bones. A low, almost melodic vibration that resonated not in the ears but in the mind. Collins clutched his helmet, muttering incoherently. The others froze, unsure if the sound was real or imagined. Then, as quickly as it had come, it faded. Duval steadied himself against the table. "Sir, these men, what were they doing here?" Mendez didn't answer. His eyes had caught something on the final page, a list of names, each one followed by a date. The last line read simply, "All 31 subjects sealed, chamber closed, external contact forbidden." He looked around the room again. 31 bunks, 31 men. Then the light struck something glinting near the floor. A small metal tray had fallen beneath the central table. On it lay a row of glass vials filled with a dark, viscous substance, black as ink, thick as tar, each labeled with a single word: Nachtsicht, night vision. Collins bent down, reaching for one of the vials. "What do you think this is?" "Don't touch it," Mendez snapped, but it was too late. The moment Collins lifted it, the glass grew warm in his hand. He dropped it instinctively. It shattered on the ground, and the black liquid spread across the concrete, glistening like oil. A faint hiss rose from the floor, followed by the faintest movement beneath the bunks. The soldiers aimed their rifles. "Something's moving," Duval whispered. Then from the farthest bed came the sound of a slow exhale. The blanket shifted. Mendez stepped closer, weapon raised. "Identify yourself," he barked. No response. only the rhythmic, labored breathing of something not entirely lifeless. He pulled back the blanket. The soldier's chest was rising and falling. His face was still sealed. No eyes, no mouth, but the skin moved faintly, stretching with each breath. Then through the stitched lips a wet sound escaped, a voice crushed by flesh itself, mumbling something in German. Duval leaned in, straining to hear. Licht. Tut weh. Light. Hurts. Duval stumbled back. He's alive! Jesus Christ, he's alive! The figure convulsed violently, muscles twitching beneath the skin as if trying to see without eyes. Mendez shouted for everyone to stand back, but the moment his flashlight beam struck the man's face, he let out a piercing, guttural shriek that echoed through the entire bunker. The light shattered instantly. Every bulb in the chamber exploded in unison, plunging them into absolute blackness. Chaos erupted, the sound of boots shouting, the metallic clang of rifles striking concrete. Someone fired. Sparks burst briefly, revealing shadows moving between the bunks. Multiple figures now twitching, rising, not fast, but deliberate, as though guided by something unseen. The air filled with the stench of formaldehyde and rot. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went still. When the emergency torch finally flickered back to life, the beds were empty. All 31 blankets lay discarded on the floor. Collins was gone. And on the wall, smeared in black fluid that hadn't been there before, a message appeared, written by a hand that couldn't see. Wir haben das Licht gegessen. We have eaten the light. Mendez's voice broke the silence, hoarse and shaking. Seal this room. No one goes back in. He didn't yet realize that whatever had awakened in Bunker 32 wasn't trapped there anymore. The corridors of Bunker 32 had changed. What had once been still and airless now pulsed faintly, as if the concrete itself were breathing. Captain Mendez could feel the rhythm under his boots, slow, deliberate, almost human. The faint vibration seemed to answer his heartbeat. The remaining soldiers, Duval, Harris, and one radio operator named Langley, followed close behind, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The air had grown thick with dust and vaporized salt from the nearby sea, but beneath it lingered a new scent. Something medicinal, like ether mixed with decay. It burned the throat when breathed too deeply. They advanced toward the inner corridor, the one the Germans had sealed with concrete plates. The hum that had plagued them earlier was louder now, resonating like the drone of an unseen generator. But there was no machinery here, no power source at all. The cables that once ran along the ceiling were severed, their copper veins torn out long ago. Still, the light bulbs along the walls flickered with a faint, bluish pulse, as though fed by something not entirely electric. Duval's voice broke the silence. Sir, if these men were the subjects, then who ran the tests? Mendez didn't answer right away. He shone his light toward a rusted steel door ahead. Its label, barely legible through corrosion, read Labor 2, Nachtsicht. He inhaled slowly. We'll find out in there. Inside was no laboratory they recognized. The room was circular, walls covered in black tiles that gleamed faintly under the flashlight. Dozens of wires descended from the ceiling, ending in small clamps, most still attached to dried, withered strips of skin. In the center stood a heavy operating table surrounded by jars filled with opaque liquid. Embedded in the wall behind it was a glass observation window, cracked and clouded from the inside. On the floor, scattered papers and a single reel of film lay half buried in dust. Langley picked up the reel. The label read, Versuch 6, Augenphase. Eye phase, Duval translated. There was an old projector on a metal cart nearby, still plugged into the wall, though no power should have reached it. Mendez hesitated for a moment, then motioned to start it. The film sputtered, and a faint image flickered against the opposite wall. It was grainy, monochrome, distorted by time, but the sound was clear enough to freeze their blood. A German voice, calm and precise, filled the room. Day 23. Subject Dr. 28 has lost visual coherence, attempting full inversion. The screen showed a man strapped to the table, eyes wide open under clamps. A bright light shone directly into his pupils until the corneas turned milky white. Then the film jumped. Another frame, another man, this one screaming as a black fluid was injected into his optic nerves. His skin convulsed, his face twisting in agony, and then suddenly, silence. The doctor leaned into the frame, speaking to someone off camera. Darkness must enter through the sight, only then can it consume the image. Langley stopped the reel, his hands shaking. What in God's name were they doing? Mendez's jaw tightened. Trying to create soldiers who could see in the dark, he said flatly. They inverted the eye, turned it inward. The hum deepened, vibrating through the projector. It began to overheat, smoke curling from its base. Duval yanked the plug, but the machine continued to whir on its own, the film spinning faster until it snapped. The light died abruptly, leaving them in near darkness. Only the pale glow of their torches remained. That's when they heard the footsteps, bare, slow, wet. Not behind them, but inside the observation chamber beyond the glass. Mendez turned his light toward it. A figure stood there, tall, skeletal, wrapped in a torn white coat stained brown with age. The skin on its head was translucent, veins visible beneath, and where its eyes should have been were two hollow cavities pulsing faintly with bluish light. The creature lifted its hand and pressed it against the cracked glass. The hum rose in pitch until the very air seemed to tear. "Move!" Mendez shouted, pulling his men back. But before they could retreat, the glass shattered outward, spraying shards like rain. The figure collapsed halfway through the opening, twitching violently, mouth gaping though no sound escaped. Its jaw was wired shut. Inside its throat something glowed, a thin filament of blue energy moving like a living thing. Harris panicked and fired 3 rounds into its chest. The bullets sank in, but made no sound of impact. Instead, a black mist seeped from the wounds, curling upward into the air like smoke under water. The smell was unbearable, metallic, chemical, ancient. The mist began to move on its own, curling toward the ceiling and sliding along the walls like liquid shadow. Duval dropped his weapon. "It's the same substance from the vials," he whispered. "The same—" Before he could finish, the mist passed through him. Just a wisp, no thicker than a breath, yet his body seized instantly. His pupils dilated until only black remained. He fell to his knees, convulsing, whispering words in German none of them understood. "Licht kommt. Licht kommt. Light is coming." Then his head tilted upward, and for a brief, horrifying second, his empty gaze glowed faintly blue. Mendez grabbed Langley's shoulder. "We're leaving now." They fled into the corridor, but the sound followed. The hum, the pulse, the whispering echo of dozens of unseen voices blending into one continuous drone. The lights above them flickered as if in rhythm with those murmurs. As they ran, the walls seemed to close in. The corridors twisted in ways they hadn't before, doors appearing where none existed, others vanishing behind them. The architecture of the bunker was changing, reshaping itself like a living organism. Mendez tried to keep his bearing, but every turn brought them back to the same corridor, the same symbol painted in red. Kein Licht, kein Himmel. Langley stumbled to his knees, clutching his head. "It's in my eyes," he cried. "I can see it inside." He dropped his flashlight, and for an instant, his pupils shimmered faintly, reflecting light that wasn't there. Then he screamed, a raw animal sound, and collapsed face first. When Mendez turned him over, Langley's eyes were gone. Not damaged, gone. The skin had sealed itself smooth, just like the soldiers on the bunks. The hum stopped. Silence returned, thick, suffocating. Mendez stood alone now. His breath came in short bursts, his heart hammering like artillery. He turned back toward the lab. The projector lay shattered on the floor, still smoking. On the wall, where the film had played moments earlier, something new had appeared. Words scrawled in ash, trembling faintly in the residual heat. "The experiment continues in the dark." He backed away slowly, gun raised, though he knew it was useless. The black mist pooled near the doorway, spreading like spilled ink. Within it, faint outlines moved. Figures, dozens of them, their heads bowed, their sockets glowing faintly blue. 31 silhouettes. The missing soldiers. Mendez stumbled backward down the corridor, firing blindly into the dark. Each muzzle flash illuminated the figures for just a fraction of a second, frozen, eyeless faces staring toward him. The bullets passed through without sound. He turned and ran, the echo of his own footsteps swallowed by the walls. At the far end of the hall he found a ladder leading upward, a maintenance shaft rusted with time. He climbed frantically, lungs burning, hands slick with blood he didn't remember bleeding. The hum followed him, growing softer as he ascended, as though the bunker were exhaling him, releasing him back into the world. When he finally burst through the hatch into the pale daylight of Normandy, the sea wind hit him like a rebirth. He collapsed onto the sand, gasping, staring at the grey sky. For a moment he believed he was safe. Then he noticed the faint reflection in the puddle beside him, his own eyes shimmering faintly blue. Beneath the cliffs, Bunker 32 hummed one last time, like a machine powering down. But somewhere inside, the experiment continued. The official report filed by Captain Harold Mendez was only 3 pages long. 3 pages for something that defied every language, every rule of science and reason. It was dated December 14, 1944, and classified top secret, for command, eyes only. The summary was sterile, almost cowardly in its vagueness. Reconnaissance unit encountered structural collapse near Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer. All personnel presumed dead, no hostile engagement confirmed, no mention of the bodies. No mention of the eyes, no mention of the humming bunker buried beneath the sand. The next morning the storm came. The French coastline was swallowed by waves and wind that screamed like the dead themselves. By dawn, Bunker 32 was gone, consumed by a landslide that turned rock into mud and mud into water. The entrance disappeared beneath tons of earth, sealing whatever remained inside. The locals said the sea had reclaimed what didn't belong to men. But when the Allied engineers examined the site weeks later, they found something impossible. The sand above the bunker was magnetic. Compasses spun, and equipment failed. A sergeant who stepped too close collapsed, screaming that he could see the light, even with his eyes closed. Mendez was transferred 2 days later. His superiors called it exhaustion. Combat stress reaction. He was sent to London for evaluation, where he spent long hours staring at walls that seemed to breathe when the lamps flickered. The doctors called it hallucinations caused by trauma, though no sedative managed to silence the low vibration he swore he could still hear in his skull. He tried to explain once what had happened below the cliffs, how the dark had shape, how silence had rhythm, how the light itself could rot. The psychiatrist listening to him stopped writing halfway through. He looked at Mendez for a long moment and simply said, "You are not the first man to talk about the humming." Those words never left him. By spring 1945, Mendez was declared unfit for duty and discharged quietly. No medals, no mention in the records. He rented a small room above a fishmonger's shop in Portsmouth, where the sea's scent reminded him of the Normandy coast. He drank heavily, though not to forget. He drank to stop remembering too clearly. Some nights, when the tide was low, he swore he could hear the hum again, carried by the wind through the broken window frame. In June, he received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a coastal excavation site, French soldiers standing beside an opened crate. Inside the crate were 31 glass jars, each containing an eyeball suspended in amber-colored liquid. On the back of the photo, written in precise German script, Nachtsicht Phase 4, continuation secured. He burned the letter that same night, but the smell of smoke reminded him of something from the bunker, the projector melting, the black mist curling along the walls like liquid shadow. He dreamt of Duval calling for him in the dark, of Langley's eyes sealing over with skin, of the faint blue glow under his own eyelids when he closed them too long. Meanwhile, in France, rumors spread quietly among engineers working along the Atlantic coast. They said that near Omaha Beach, the ground still vibrated when the tide retreated, as if something massive, buried deep below, was still alive. Some nights, fishermen claimed to see faint lights flickering beneath the waves, like eyes opening for a brief second before vanishing again. The French authorities sealed the entire area, citing unexploded ordnance, a convenient lie. Decades passed. The war ended. Files were buried, burned, rewritten. The Allied archives labeled Bunker 32 under incomplete intelligence, but a few fragments escaped destruction. In 1952, a declassified document surfaced briefly before disappearing again into private hands. It referenced Nachtvisionsträger, the carriers of night vision, human subjects adapted for sensory reversal. The report suggested that one specimen had survived the war and was transferred to a facility near Wittenberg under Soviet custody. No further records were found. In 1961, a British journalist named Arthur Vale tracked down Harold Mendez in a veterans hospital outside Dover. The captain was blind by then, not from injury but from a progressive condition that doctors couldn't name. His eyes had clouded completely white, yet he could still describe the shape of objects in front of him. Vale's notes, later published posthumously, recorded Mendez's last coherent statement: "I can see the dark now. It has depth, it moves, it breathes like it's remembering." After that interview, Mendez vanished from the hospital without notice. His room was found undisturbed except for one thing: a sealed envelope on his nightstand. Inside was a drawing made in thick charcoal, a circle of 31 figures standing around an operating table, heads bowed, eyes missing. At the center, a single empty chair facing them. Beneath it, one sentence written shakily in English and German. It wasn't an experiment, it was an invitation. The British authorities confiscated the letter and all of Vale's remaining notes. The official cause of Mendez's disappearance was listed as suicidal escape attempt. Yet, weeks later, a night watchman stationed at the harbor claimed he saw a man standing knee-deep in the tide, staring toward the horizon under the full moon. "He didn't move," the watchman said. "He just whispered something over and over, sounded like a hum." No body was ever recovered. By the early 1970s, rumors of Bunker 32 had turned into legend. Treasure hunters searched the Normandy coast for its remnants, only to find fields of twisted rebar and fragments of metal with numbers etched into them, all 32. French geologists later determined that the cliff beneath Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer was hollow. When they drilled samples, the bits returned scorched, magnetized, and vibrating faintly even when cooled. The team discontinued the excavation, and the French Ministry of Defense declared the site restricted indefinitely. But every few years, during certain storms, the sand shifts, and for a brief moment, parts of the old concrete bunker emerge from the earth, the edges of a doorway, a piece of the steel hatch. Locals say that when it happens, the air turns heavy and the sea falls silent. No gulls, no wind, no waves, just that deep, bone-born hum. And sometimes under the moonlight, you can see faint reflections scattered in the puddles across the beach, small, pale circles, glowing like eyes, just beneath the surface of the sand. The consequences of that night in 1944 didn't die with the men who entered Bunker 32. They were carried forward, through blood, through memory, through something invisible that latched onto silence itself. Files were sealed, names erased, and every surviving photograph burned to ash. Yet every fire leaves a trace of heat. Every erased voice leaves an echo. Some say Captain Mendez tried to destroy whatever had followed him. Others believe he became it, the first of the carriers. Whatever truth remains sleeps beneath Normandy, humming softly through the centuries, waiting for the next soldier foolish enough to dig where no light belongs. Because the silence never stopped. It was only listening. By the time the war's last sirens faded, Bunker 32 had already slipped from memory. The maps erased it, the sea buried it, history folded it neatly between statistics and silence, but some stains never dry. In the archives of London, Paris, and Washington, a few remaining pages still tremble when touched, as if the ink itself remembers. They describe men who returned from Normandy hollow-eyed, who woke in the night convinced that something behind their eyelids was watching them back. Doctors called it shell shock, families called it madness. Yet all of them, without exception, whispered of the same sound before their deaths, a faint, steady hum that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. 75 years later, the cliffs remain quiet. Tourists walk above the dunes, unaware that beneath their feet lies a sealed labyrinth of rust and salt. The tide has smoothed every trace of war, but sometimes when the moon is low, fishermen claim to see a pulse beneath the water, like a heartbeat trapped in stone. The French government dismisses it as folklore. Still, divers who venture too close to the restricted zone speak of compasses spinning wildly, of radios that pick up whispers instead of static. One diver, interviewed in 1998, described seeing 31 shapes standing upright inside a flooded corridor, unmoving, their heads tilted toward the surface. He never dived again. The last verifiable artifact connected to the site surfaced in 2007. A crate recovered during dredging operations near Arromanches contained fragments of glass jars and a steel plate etched with a phrase identical to the one found on the bunker wall. Kein Licht, kein Himmel. No light, no heaven. The French Ministry of Defense denied its authenticity within hours. The crate was destroyed in a containment fire. The diver who found it died in his sleep 3 days later, his pupils fully dilated, though doctors found no cause. Officially, Bunker 32 never existed. Unofficially, it exists everywhere, whenever men bury truth to preserve order. The silence that followed it is not absence, but containment, a boundary drawn to keep curiosity from becoming contagion. Every government that inherited fragments of the project sealed them under new names: Project Night Vision, Operation Echo Glass, Study 5112B. Each disappeared in turn, as if swallowed by the same dark that first birthed them. And yet, the hum persists. It lives in the magnetic residue of old film reels, in the circuits of radios that tune themselves to dead frequencies, in the dreams of those who have looked too long into the void. Sometimes, on stormy nights, a faint transmission is caught by coastal stations across Europe, a pattern of tones repeating endlessly, 31 notes, always the same rhythm. Engineers call it interference. Historians call it coincidence. But those who know the legend call it the eyes of Normandy, watching, waiting, remembering. Perhaps that is how memory survives after all, not in monuments or medals, but in the frequencies we refuse to hear. Every generation buries its own bunker, sealing away the horrors it cannot explain, and every generation swears it will never happen again, until it does. So when you hear the wind along the French coast, listen closely. If the sea ever goes quiet, if the air turns heavy and the sand seems to vibrate under your feet, leave. Do not look back. Some darknesses are not meant to be seen. But for those who still believe that truth, no matter how cold or forbidden, deserves to be unearthed, this channel exists for you. These are the stories the world tried to erase, the experiments, the disappearances, the silences that still hum beneath our history. Each one a reminder that the line between science and damnation was crossed long before we were born. If you've reached this far, you already feel it, that uneasy pulse in the back of your skull, the echo that says some secrets never die. So help keep them alive in memory, not in silence. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment with where you're watching from. And most of all, share this story before it's buried again. Because somewhere beneath Normandy, the hum still waits, steady, patient, eternal. And if we stop listening, it will begin again.